is seasonal forecasting enough for decision making, especially if you're given the probability issue? Is it enough for decision making, or what more information is needed?
Yeah, very good question, Diana. I mean, that's one of the things that we are trying to address with the focus-based financing approach, that we are asking stakeholders to think about what impacts are really driven by the climate or the weather, and which are these impacts that you want to address. So, for example, in much of Eastern Africa, they'll say when we got below average rainfall, a drought occurs, we don't have enough water, our livestock and our crops, basically we lose them because there's not enough rainfall. And so if really we want to address things such as access to water, to enable our livestock to have enough, to enable us to grow crops, we start to think critically about, is a seasonal rainfall forecast enough? We also need to understand, how does that rainfall translate into enough water for the crops to grow all the way to maturity so that we can get a yield out of it? Is it enough water such that our livestock can continue to produce milk so that our children will have, the nutritional value of milk throughout the season? So we are sitting together with scientific institutions, research institutions like Down to Earth, and starting to think about how can we iterate seasonal forecasts to tell us something about what will happen to the water, what will happen to the vegetation. Can we translate that into what will be the impact on our livelihoods, such that we can make sure that we are taking appropriate action equal to or close enough to what the forecast is saying? Because rainfall enough sometimes is not easily translatable into, does that mean my livestock are not going to have enough water? So we need some information that is slightly about interpretation, but some of it is also about research and development to iterate this, to give us some other forms of information that is closer to the challenge that we want to address. Back to you, Dana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I add something?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So the World Food Programme started to use seasonal forecasts after I went to visit them about 15 years ago. I was invited by them at the FAO office in Roma. And what I explained to them is that if you use seasonal forecast, even if they are in probabilistic terms, they can help you deciding what actions I can take. So suppose there is a drought coming to Eastern Africa. If 3 months before that, I have a probability of 60%, which means it's only 6 times out of 10 it will actually happen. But if I know that there is a 60% probability that a drought will come, 3 months beforehand, I can start taking some actions, mobilizing food or warning the people. As we get closer to the event of interest, we can use a 2 months forecast, which is more accurate than a 3, a 1 month forecast, which is more accurate than a 2, and then weekly forecast. And as we get closer, the forecast will be more correct and more actions can be taken. This is what I explained they should do, and this is what they are doing. So even if the forecast is in probabilistic terms, there are some actions that make sense to take, okay? Even if you're not certain about whether it will actually be drought or not.
Okay, and there is a question from one of the participants, which I think is kind of related to this. They're asking, what makes some of the seasonal forecasts wrong? So, we're talking about probability. So let's say you've given that 60% probability that it's going to rain. So farmers have prepared, but then the rains don't come. And they get very angry.
Yeah.
And they start yelling at scientists.
Yeah.
Well,
okay. Why did the forecast go wrong? For 2 main reasons. Okay. One, we do not have enough observations over the whole globe, over the oceans, to know exactly what's the weather state today. If we make an error in the knowledge of the ocean, we will have an error in the seasonal forecast about it for 3 months. So 1, errors in estimating the state of the atmosphere now. Second, errors in the model. We build model at our best, but again, I said, we solve the equations on a grid with a certain spacing. We have a piece of code, 100 lines of code that simulates what's happening in a cloud. A cloud is more complex than that. So maybe our cloud is not as accurate as the real one. If you have many clouds which behave slightly differently, then you might have a wrong seasonal forecast. So this is why, as you go farther into the future, the errors can become bigger.
Yeah. And another question from the one of the participants is, where can we get the skills for analyzing climate forecasts? You know, the knowledge that you have. How can they go about, developing the skills themselves? I mean, maybe it's a researcher or a student. I know we have some students as well here. We have some researchers. So where can they get the skills for analyzing climate forecasts? Are there any institutions who train people to have these skills? Yes, so maybe Teferi or Roberto, I think you have had the skill development. You can tell us.
I mean,
Teferi, do you want to start? Yeah.
Yeah, there are so many centers. I mean, I don't know. For example, if he's from the National Med Services or even at the regional scale, centers like ICPAC, they do have capacity building trainings. But at the same time, there are programs, like by ICTP, for example, a center in northern Italy, which gives training. So I think, and there are a number of capacity buildings happening in different times. So that is one thing that needs to be, taken into consideration. So I think that communication with the centers is very important to get the skill.
Yeah, I would add that if people look for, I've answered one or two questions in the Q&A. I would look at the sites of institutions like the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast, the Copernicus Climate Change Service, the project. Roberta Boscolo from the WMO Focus Africa project is online. Search for this project. They will have some information on how they verify seasonal forecast, where can data be found, and so on. ACMAD in Africa, International Center, is also, I guess, having some information. So ICTP Trieste, the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, also runs very good courses, 2-3 weeks for courses, and they encourage people from Africa and also to apply and come. And usually this course would train the people to understand this is, for example, the seasonal forecast, and know how to verify them.
Thank you. Maurine, I do have another question for you. I know you need to leave, but I wanted to ask you, well, it's one of the questions from our participants. How can we use forecasting to support CSOs to advocate to increase response, as well as help institutions to reach the end user? So, WFP is probably well-funded and can be able to respond during a crisis. But for local CSOs who are trying to fundraise or who are trying to hold leaders accountable, to respond to extreme weather events that have impacted poor communities, how can we support those institutions to advocate for increased support?
Thank you very much, Dan. Actually, you'll be a bit surprised to know WFP is not as well funded as we would like. Compared to the level of need we have to support, we are not actually as well funded as is really needed. But back to your question about CSOs and advocacy. So through the focus-based financing approach, what we are asking is that can partners come to collaborate with us to implement this approach? Part of what we are doing is we are putting together a guiding framework that starts to define what focus are we going to act on. I've seen another comment on the chat around using different focus at different advanced time to be able to take different actions. So we are sitting together to figure out what are these different lead times or different advanced time we should take action. Is it 6 months before the season starts and it's going to be a bad season? Is it 3 months? Is it 5 months? Is it, and being able to define across the timeline what potential actions can we take, and to collectively agree that these are the actions we're going to take. These are the roles and responsibilities, including with local CSOs, so that we can especially ensure that we are reaching the communities on the ground. Now, this guiding framework, we are calling it a standard operating procedure in WFP, but similar work is being done by like the Red Cross. They're calling it an early action protocol. And this guiding framework can be a framework that is owned by all of us and not just like WFP, right? And through this framework, if we can also work with the government institutions to commit that if the focus says there's a 60% probability that it's going to be, let's say, below average rainfall, we are going to make sure that we are distributing drought-tolerant seeds. We are going to make sure that the water reserves are checked so that we have access to water. Whatever repairs need to be done, they will actually be done so that we can tap whatever is existing. We get our governments to define very specific actions that you're going to implement based on the forecast, and also to commit to funding these actions, to commit to pre-allocate this financing such that even that local CSO can support to implement these actions, reaching all the communities on the ground. And through this common framework, it can be a very good advocacy instrument, especially if we get governments to commit to it, that CSOs can use to make sure that action is implemented on the ground based on seasonal and other types of forecasts. And so this is the work that we're currently doing in many parts of Africa and globally. And we're really calling on partners to come and join this conversation so that in the end, as the video said, we are not only seeing dead headlines of disasters because of climate, but more of how we have been able to manage this climate in an anticipatory manner. Back to you, Dana.
Okay, and I think it would be really important for the media to be involved in this part. How can we, work with you to be able to, help our audiences understand that this is the plan that is going to go in if there's a crisis like the standard operating procedure that you said that also the Red Cross has. I think it would be very important for the media to be able to understand it and communicate it to the audiences so that they can know what to expect. And is WFP, does it engage with the media to be able to do that?
To be honest, Diana, I think we do need we did need an enhanced level of media engagement in these processes, not just to disseminate the information, but for media to also be part of the process of developing these standard operating procedures. Because at the end of the day, even when, let's say, we have set our threshold of we'll take action when the focus says 20% chance below average, we need these alerts to be widely spread out so that the communities themselves know the alert has been issued, what are the actions they are going to implement themselves versus what are the actions they are expecting government, other organizations to come and support them to implement. So again, what we are calling is that we have a common framework that is agreed across all the stakeholders who really need to be part of it, from media to governments to humanitarian and development organizations to donors, so that we all have a guiding framework that we can refer to to be able to take action based on forecasts. Thank you.
So yeah, we have quite a few journalists in this webinar. So it would be good if some of the journalists could reach out to WFP and, collaborate in this. I'm conscious of time. So I would there's one question that has been asked that I think either Roberto or Teferi could be able to answer. How do we reconcile different forecasts from different providers? Which ones should we trust and put more emphasis on? I'm guessing because there's different information coming from different forecasts.
Teferi, do you want to
go ahead? You already responded in the chat box.
Yeah, I responded. So different seasonal forecasts are based on different models. So even if we more or less use the same observations to estimate the state of the atmosphere now, when forecasts are issued, the European Centre uses their own model, UK Met Office their own model, Australia their own model, and so on. Some models are better than others, and this is why you might see that one system is better than another. But again, this is usually valid on average. If you take many seasons, many areas, in specific location, you might see that last summer, the German seasonal forecast was better than anyone else. But on average, I would say that the European Centre model, the European Centre forecast, and the one by the UK Met Office are the best.
Just to add a few points on this, Diana. Centers like ICPAC and other regional climate centers, that's why they use what we call average of the different models. So some models, as mentioned, are doing much better, and some others are not doing much better. So what they tried to do was to check first which of the models are actually working much better in this season and for a certain region. Then they do some kind of what we call ensemble, averaging of the models. So I think the skill might go down when you do the averaging, but it still gives you a very good idea when it comes to the forecast.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we've already passed the time we were supposed to. But then if you have any more additional questions, please feel free to send them to ICPAC and we will ask our panelists to respond to them. And if you're interested in doing another session where questions can be answered, please let us know. Once again, I'd like to thank Roberto, Teferi, and Maurine. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. And I hope people are understanding seasonal forecasting better and have identified new ways that they can respond and new partners that they can work with to ensure that we serve the communities that we are working for. Thank you very much, panelists, and thank you very much, participants.
Thank you, Diana, for a fantastic sharing. Thank you to the audience for extremely challenging and very good questions.
Thank you, everyone.